Enneagram 1s are the biggest haters. They hate the way that you walk, the way that you talk. They hate the way that you dress. They feel a deep, righteous anger towards anything that does not live up to their standard of perfection. Everything must be right. Everyone must follow the code. Most of all, themselves. You can spot a 1 character by the way they cling to some set of rules. Duty, honor, the law. What the rules are is irrelevant because the Enneagram isn't about whatever. So, why does the 1 fixation revolve around rules? Well, at some point, the Type 1 realized that the only way to achieve the peace they needed in a turbulent world was to correct their behavior, to correct the world around them, to correct everything. I will unpack this more thoroughly in a bit, but first, let's look at the storytelling implications of writing such a dogmatic right versus wrong thinker. Specifically, we have to ask, what does it mean for such a character to grow? What is the Type 1's story? Well, in a single phrase, the 1 needs to get their hands dirty. The 1 character will begin the story clinging to their principles. These are not necessarily the principles of their culture. It's a personal code first and foremost, but it's rigid, dogmatic, black and white sense of morality. But then over the course of the story, that perspective will be challenged. Probably the most popular one in recent TV was Ned Stark from the first season of Game of Thrones. When we meet Ned, he is as dogmatic as they come. He follows ancient, crusty laws. There is nothing more important to him than honor, truth, and justice. And in a less intelligent story, these qualities would not be interrogated. It would just be, look at hero guy, he's a hero, he's good, be like him. But as with most of my favorite stories, the plot of season 1 is custom built to challenge the protagonist on the deepest level. Ned is ordered to leave his hometown and travel to King's Landing to serve as the vice president. But once he gets to the capital, he realizes that his principles are not shared by the people around him. King's Landing is filled with liars, cheaters, ass-kissers, power grabbers. Because Ned stands in such stark contrast to them, he makes a lot of enemies. The catharsis of watching Ned lay down the law slowly turns to dread as we realize his morality is only going to get people killed. He is not helping anyone by standing on his business. But still, Ned refuses to play the game, clinging to his oneness even as he's betrayed by his last allies and thrown into a cell. Ned would rather die than compromise his honor. But then this dude, Varys, is like, hey, buddy, so I don't know if you realize this, but you've ignited a war and put your entire family in jeopardy. I hope your honor is worth getting your children killed. And Ned is like, oh, yeah, it totally is. But the cracks are starting to show. Ned's rigid sense of honor is preventing him from loving his family. And so, in the end, Ned chooses to lie, to confess to a crime he didn't commit in order to stop the war and save his children. It's the ultimate Type 1 ego death. And spoilers, it's fittingly followed by his literal death. Killing characters just to punctuate a story can feel disingenuous sometimes, but also, when a character has undergone a full 180 on their particular thematic axis, sometimes it's best to just get them out of the way. In a long-term story that you plan to outlast this particular arc, sometimes it's best to kill them off at their most relevant rather than letting them stick around and hog space from other characters who might still have thematic gas in the tank. Now, you might just have a little alarm bell going off in your head like, wait, I thought you said honor was a Type 6 thing, like with Zuko, and it can be, but honor is just a word. Words can mean different things. For Zuko, honor meant his purpose, his place in the system, and the approval of his superiors. For Ned, honor meant his moral compass. Words are just tools we use to approximate reality. Don't get hung up on specific words. Look at choices, look at through lines. There's really only one Type 1 growth story, and it's easy to spot. Again, the character has to get their hands dirty. They have to break their own rules. Kate from Sicario. She starts off with the moral high ground, but slowly realizes that the world isn't so simple. Sicario says, you have to get your hands dirty if you want to make real change, and Kate is not a fan of this. Kate's eventual breaking point is framed in a morally neutral light. She's asked to sign off on a document saying the crimes she witnessed south of the border never happened. When she refuses, Benicio del Toro is like, I will actually kill you if you don't sign this document, and she reluctantly does. Disillusionment, the end. Detective Katagiri from Tokyo Vice. He's a good cop who plays by the rules, but his rigidness prevents him from stopping the ruthless Yakuza boss Shinzo Tozawa. For 2 seasons, we see Katagiri cling to his righteous anger, this belief that he can achieve his ends by being good, by being legitimate, by being right, but it doesn't work. The right way to do things fails. And so Katagiri's defining moment comes when he obtains the evidence that has the potential to take down Tozawa for good. But instead of trying to pursue legal justice, which hasn't been working, Katagiri puts his faith in the honor of the Yakuza. He bypasses the press and gives the evidence to Tozawa's men. Realizing he has no honor, they turn on Tozawa and force him to take his own life. The show is so good. Of course, arc theory doesn't mean the character needs to do a complete 180. It just means we need to establish a general direction that means growth, and any movement in that direction is good for the character and counts as an arc. If you're willing to sacrifice your firstborn to get a copy, go watch Catherine Bigelow's Strange Days. Strange Days is about a world where people record memories and sell those memories on the black market. But one particular memory contains evidence of massive corruption in the LAPD, and the movie centers around that MacGuffin. If the evidence gets out, it will change the world. Angela Bassett in this movie is maybe my favorite one to ever won. She's a limo driver who incidentally knows guns and kung fu. Awesome, I buy it. But despite being a clear-cut one in the vein of Ned or Kate or Katagiri, Mace doesn't completely fall on her sword or anything. She remains the moral voice throughout the story. But sure enough, since she exists on the one axis, there are moments where she has to get her hands dirty and go against her principles in order to get the job done. If we didn't know the axis of growth for her, those moments wouldn't be easy to plant, but we do. When she has to use the memory tech, it's like a big moment for her because she just thinks it's so profane and awful, but like she does. She gets her hands dirty. And the story applies the same thinking to her relationship with Ralph Fiennes. She won't allow herself to love him because he's flawed.
You're gonna get yourself killed for this. For this toxic waste bitch.
Specifically, he's a 7 who escapes into positive memories and puts his own comfort over the greater good. Low-key, the one part of this movie that's difficult for me to buy is that she would like him at all. He's like the sultan of sleaze, but whatever. Throughout the movie, she warms up to his perspective, and he has his own arc where he stops living in a fantasy, and they eventually meet in the middle, and it's great. It's always been easy for me to pick these Type 1 stories out, but I will confess, my lack of deep Type 1 knowledge really kept me up at night for a while. Ones are the type I've struggled with the most. Like, I have one in my tri-type, which if you don't know is a way to categorize yourself where you pick a number from each of the 3 clusters like some limited time Applebee's deal, but I've always had issues extrapolating that to the level of a primary urge. It's not that I wasn't familiar with the Type 1 complex. I can regurgitate what people say about ones. I can regurgitate what ones say about themselves. I can take pages and pages and pages of notes, but to me that's not enough. I need to understand a thing in my own deep, intuitive, simple way. And with ones I was never able to, for a couple reasons. The first is that I didn't understand how oneness could be adaptive. Every type fixation is, in theory, a strategy for getting your needs met. And for every other number, I get this, clear as day. But for the life of me, I could not pin down how an authority-neutral, righteous anger about everything could possibly be useful. Which ties into my second point of contention, which is how ones could be gut types, supposedly ruled by their instincts. Every depiction of the one seems less about their instincts and more about the big conscious philosophy they cling to, which reads like a head type, or self-worth, which reads like a heart type. I was like, shit, does the Enneagram not make sense? Am I just crazy? Like, do I only think this is useful? But I've really cut my teeth on this stuff, and I'm ready to give it my best shot. As gut types, ones have a passionate anger inside of them. 8s express that anger explicitly, 9s numb it to maintain a false peace, but ones apply that anger selectively. So the system of rules they have is actually just a big cope to rationalize and justify the gut energy inside of them. It's like a dam. There's a reservoir of lawless, visceral, impulsive anger in ones, but instead of letting it flow freely like an 8 or unconsciously repressing it like a 9, the one forces that anger into specific paths. The one strategically allows their anger to leak out in specific circumstances according to specific principles to the degree that you almost think the principles are the point, but really the principles are just a strategy to manage the gut energy, to stay in control of that anger. Their principles are just a big concrete wall holding back the Katara from The Last Airbender is a Type 1. I know everybody sees the motherhood stuff and assumes she's a 2, but they're not looking deep enough. Think about Katara's big through lines and moments in the show. At the beginning, it's all about her responsibilities. Katara has to repress her passion and her anger because it's her job to be a responsible little village girl. Katara also buries her hatred and her resentment for her mother's killer, but deep down it's still in there, and when it rises to the surface, it takes over as an all-consuming rage. Katara's neglected anger almost takes her past the point of no return, but she chooses peace and forgoes justice. This is her defining moment in the entire story of The Last Airbender, and it's a one moment. In the 8 video, I talked about how revenge was correlated to the gut center. In many ways, though, revenge is even more one-coded than it is eight-coded because it's about what the other person deserves. It's a value judgment. It's about what's right. Colton from You've Got a Type is a 1, and he very insightfully pointed out to me that justice comes from the body. That visceral feeling of thing bad, destroy, is derived from the gut center, not the head or the heart. Go check out You've Got a Type. I could not have written this video without him. But with all of these type 1s whose default is good, it's important to remember that oneness isn't about one specific definition of morality or honor. A 1 character could religiously believe it's their sacred duty to kill every puppy, and getting their hands dirty means deciding not to kill a puppy. You have to get out of the moral binary. The meta framing of your story is not a part of its actual nuts and bolts. Like with every number, the type 1 tragedy involves the character failing to let go of their fixation, so following their code even if it leads to heartbreak and ruin. This is the Thanos story. He believes he has to do the thing, and he does, even though it costs him everything. But that's 1s, and what do you know? I'm out of numbers.